Psalm 23 might be the most famous passage in the whole Bible, but here's the shocking truth. Most people quote it without ever realizing the hidden secret buried inside it. And once you finally see what David was really saying, it will flip your entire perspective on life, fear, death, and even how God shows up in your daily struggles. Psalm 23 is one of those scriptures that almost everyone has heard at some point in their life. You might have heard it recited at a funeral, whispered in a hospital room, or read in a quiet moment when someone was searching for peace. It's painted on plaques, stitched onto pillows, and sung in hymns. But here's the problem. Because it's so familiar, most people stop short of really understanding what it means. They know the words, but the words haven't traveled deep enough to change the way they live every single day. In this video, we're going to open Psalm 23 in a way you may have never experienced before. Each verse carries a truth that speaks directly to the struggles we face today. Fear, stress, loneliness, anxiety about the future, even the fear of death itself. David didn't write this psalm as a poetic line for greeting cards. He wrote it out of real-life experiences, out of nights spent in danger, days filled with pressure, and moments when he had nothing but God to rely on. If you stick with me, you'll discover how this psalm is more than comforting words. It's a blueprint for trust. It's a roadmap for peace in the middle of chaos. And it's a secret weapon for living with confidence in a world that constantly shakes us. By the end of this video, you won't just hear Psalm 23 differently. You'll feel it working in your life. This isn't just about learning scripture. It's about experiencing the shepherd behind the words. And that, I promise you, will change everything. Psalm 23 has been more than a comforting passage. It has been a lifeline through history. Think about how often it has been read in the darkest moments of human experience. Soldiers on the battlefield carried it with them into war. Prisoners whispered it under their breath when no other words would come. Families clung to it in hospital waiting rooms, repeating those lines again and again, because somehow those ancient words reached across time and gave them courage to face what was in front of them. For centuries, this psalm has been like a soundtrack of faith, echoing through cathedrals, country churches, and homes where people felt too weak to keep going on their own. During World War II, countless men and women carried small Bibles with Psalm 23 underlined, because in the trenches, when death was only a breath away, the promise of a shepherd who walked with them was the only anchor they had. And even today, people who don't consider themselves deeply religious know these words. The Lord is my shepherd. Something about them sticks, because deep down, every human heart longs for a guide, a protector, someone who sees them when they feel invisible. It's not just history that shows the power of this psalm. It's the way it continues to comfort ordinary people in everyday struggles. A mother overwhelmed by bills and sleepless nights finds peace when she reads, I shall not want. A man battling illness gains strength when he says, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Psalm 23 has always had this strange ability to meet people exactly where they are, whether it's in a battlefield or a living room. That's the power of Psalm 23. It's not just a poem. It's not just tradition. It's living truth. And that's why it has survived and carried meaning for thousands of years. It continues to speak the same words of courage, peace, and hope to us right now. The Lord is my shepherd. With just those few words, David sets the stage for everything else that follows. This isn't some casual choice of language. David knew what it meant to be a shepherd, because that was his life before he ever wore a crown. He spent his youth in the fields, guiding sheep, protecting them from predators, leading them to food and water, and sometimes carrying them when they were too weak to walk. A shepherd was everything to the sheep: provider, protector, guide, and caretaker. Without the shepherd, the sheep would not survive. So when David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," he's saying more than God is good. He's declaring total trust in the one who takes responsibility for every part of his life. That little word, "my," changes everything. David doesn't say the Lord is a shepherd, as if God were just an abstract idea, a distant figure who does good things somewhere out there. He makes it personal. The Lord is my shepherd. It's intimate. It's relational. It means David isn't just part of the crowd. He belongs to God personally. That's what gives this verse its power. Not just that God is capable, but that God is connected to me, to you, to anyone who will call him their shepherd. The image of sheep and shepherd might feel far away from modern life, but in reality, it's not. Sheep are vulnerable. They can't fight off predators. They can't find safe pastures on their own, and they easily wander into danger. Sound familiar? We live in a world full of distractions, threats, and pressures. We wander into anxiety, temptation, fear, and burnout. And yet, just like a shepherd never abandons his flock, God never abandons us. David knew this from experience. He had fought lions and bears to protect his sheep. He had risked his life for them, because a true shepherd does whatever it takes to keep the flock safe. That's why calling God a shepherd isn't a weak or soft metaphor. It's a powerful one. It's about someone willing to fight for you, to lead you, to provide for you, and even to lay down his life for you. As Jesus later said, "I am the good shepherd." When David says, "The Lord is my shepherd," it's a declaration of identity and security. He's saying, "I am not on my own. I am cared for. I am guided. I am safe." And that truth alone is enough to change the way we face every challenge in life. I shall not want. It's a short line, but it carries a weight most of us overlook. David isn't saying, "I'll get everything I've ever dreamed of." He isn't promising wealth, endless success, or a life without problems. What he's really declaring is, "Because the Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing essential." It's about sufficiency, not excess. It's about trust that God provides exactly what is needed, right when it's needed, even if it doesn't look like what we expected. This is a radical statement, because if we're honest, most of us live with a constant sense of wanting. We want more money, more time, more peace, more recognition. The culture around us feeds that hunger every day, telling us we'll never be enough unless we get the next upgrade, the next achievement, the next escape. Yet David, a man who knew both poverty and wealth, danger and victory, declares boldly, "I shall not want." That's a man who found contentment not in possessions or circumstances, but in God himself. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. Maybe you're stressed about your finances, wondering how you'll pay the bills or feed your family. Maybe you're anxious about your future, unsure of your career or your relationships. David's words remind us that with God as shepherd, we can rest in the assurance that we will not be abandoned to lack. Provision doesn't always mean abundance by the world's standards. Sometimes it's the unexpected check in the mail, the meal offered by a friend, the peace that comes when you should be falling apart. David himself experienced this again and again. When he was running for his life from Saul, he didn't have palaces or banquets. He had caves, wilderness, and danger at every corner. And yet he still declared, "I shall not want." Why? because he had experienced God's hand of provision in every season. He knew that what God provided was enough to sustain him, even when circumstances screamed otherwise. This line challenges us to shift our perspective. Instead of asking, "Do I have everything I want?" the question becomes, "Do I trust that my shepherd knows what I truly need?" That trust changes our posture. It loosens the grip of anxiety. It silences the constant craving for more. It allows us to walk through life with a quiet confidence, believing that even if we don't have everything we imagined, we will always have enough in him. That is the secret of "I shall not want." It's not about what's in your hand. It's about who is holding your life. He makes me lie down in green pastures. At first glance, that sounds peaceful, like a beautiful picture for a painting or a scene from a calm countryside. But when you dig deeper, it reveals something powerful about both sheep and us. Sheep will not lie down unless they feel completely safe. If they are hungry, scared, anxious, or sense danger nearby, they stay restless, always on edge. For a sheep to lie down, it means every need is cared for, and every threat is handled by the shepherd. That's the only way they can truly rest. David is saying something huge here. God, as our shepherd, is the one who makes us lie down. In other words, he doesn't just suggest rest, he provides it. He leads us to a place where we can breathe, stop striving, and actually relax. Think about how rare that feels in our world today. We live in constant hurry, juggling work, family, deadlines, and endless noise. Rest almost feels like a luxury, and yet David shows us it's not just optional, it's essential, and it's something God himself provides. The phrase green pastures isn't just about physical grass for sheep, it's about nourishment, abundance, and safety. In the dry lands of Israel, truly green pastures didn't just happen anywhere. A shepherd had to guide the flock intentionally to find them. In the same way, God doesn't leave us wandering, searching for scraps of peace. He leads us to places where our souls can be fed and refreshed. That might look like quiet moments in prayer, the stillness of early morning, or even times when he forces us to slow down because we won't do it ourselves. If you've ever experienced burnout, you know how much this matters. You can push and push until you collapse, and even then the world tells you to keep going. But God's way is different. He makes his children rest, not because he's cruel, but because he knows we cannot survive without it. The shepherd understands our limits better than we do. When David writes this, he's not painting a romantic picture. He's describing the deep relief of being cared for by someone who sees your exhaustion and refuses to let you destroy yourself. This line reminds us that rest isn't weakness. It's not laziness. It's trust. When a sheep lies down in green pastures, it's declaring, "My shepherd has everything under control, so I can let go." And that's exactly what God invites us to do. To trust him enough to rest, even when the world says we can't afford to stop. He leads me beside still waters. The picture here is so vivid, yet it holds a depth many of us don't notice. In the dry and rocky land of Israel, water was a precious resource. Streams were often fast-moving and dangerous, and sheep, being naturally timid and weak, would panic near rushing water. They wouldn't drink from it, and if they tried, they risked being swept away. A good shepherd knew that, so he guided them to quiet, gentle waters where they could safely drink and be refreshed. David is saying that God doesn't just send us out into chaos to figure things out. He leads us to still waters, places of calm, safety, and refreshment. Think about how that applies to life today. Our world feels like a river rushing at full speed, noisy, chaotic, and overwhelming. We're constantly bombarded with information, pressure, and demands. No wonder we feel drained and parched. Yet the shepherd's way is different. He doesn't force us to drink from polluted, rushing streams. He gently guides us to what truly restores us. There's also something significant about water in Scripture. Water is life. It cleanses, it nourishes, it refreshes. Jesus even called himself the living water, promising that whoever drinks from him will never thirst again. When David writes about still waters, he's not only speaking of physical refreshment but also of spiritual renewal. It's the calm presence of God that washes away fear, anxiety, and exhaustion. Notice too that David doesn't say, "I find still waters." He says, "He leads me." That's crucial. Left to ourselves, we chase after fast-moving currents, things that look exciting or promising but leave us thirsty and restless. God, as the shepherd, takes us by the hand and leads us to what is truly good for us, even when we don't know how to get there ourselves. This is the kind of peace most of us are desperate for, but can't manufacture on our own. It's not about removing all problems. It's about experiencing God's steady presence in the middle of them. The storm may rage around you, but he leads you to a calm within it. That's what it means to be beside still waters, your soul finding peace where fear once lived. He restores my soul. These words are short, but they carry a depth that touches the very core of our human experience. To restore means to bring back to a former condition, to renew, to repair what has been broken. David isn't just talking about physical strength here. He's pointing to something much deeper. Our soul, the part of us that gets weary, crushed, and worn down by life. We live in a world that constantly drains us. Stress at work, family conflicts, disappointments, regrets, and even our own failures weigh heavily on us. Sometimes the burden isn't even visible to others. On the outside, we smile and keep moving. But inside, we're running on empty. That's exactly the place where God, the shepherd, steps in. He restores our soul. He doesn't just patch it up with a quick fix. He renews it from the inside out. The Hebrew word used here for restore carries the idea of returning, bringing back, even turning around. It's the picture of a shepherd who finds a sheep that has wandered off, weak and helpless, and carries it back to the flock. That's what God does for us when we've drifted, when our hearts feel far from him, when we're too tired to find our way back. He doesn't scold us for being broken. He restores us. Think of Elijah, the prophet who was so exhausted and discouraged that he wanted to give up. God didn't lecture him. He gave him food, rest, and a gentle whisper of his presence. That's restoration. Or think of Peter, who denied Jesus 3 times. After the resurrection, Jesus didn't discard him. Instead, he restored him with love and purpose, saying, "Feed my sheep." That's what David is describing. The shepherd who takes the parts of us that seem ruined and breathes life back into them. This verse reminds us that no matter how broken we feel, God specializes in restoration. Your past mistakes don't disqualify you. Your weariness doesn't push him away. Instead, those are the very moments when his restoring power becomes most real. Just like a shepherd bends down to lift a sheep that can't stand on its own, God bends down to lift us when our souls are too heavy to carry. And in his hands, restoration is not just possible, it's promised. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. This part of the psalm shows us that God's care goes beyond simply providing rest and restoration. He also gives direction. Sheep without a shepherd wander aimlessly, often into danger, and they don't even realize they're lost. In the same way, we can drift into decisions, habits, or relationships that seem harmless at first, but end up pulling us far away from the life God intended for us. That's why David emphasizes that the shepherd leads. He doesn't just set us free to figure things out on our own. He guides us step by step down the right paths. Notice the phrase, paths of righteousness. This doesn't just mean living a morally good life by human standards. In Hebrew, it carries the idea of straight paths, the right road, the one that takes you where you're meant to go. Righteousness here is tied to God's character. It's His way of leading us toward what is true, good, and life-giving. Sometimes that path looks like obedience to God's commands, even when culture pulls the opposite direction. Other times, it looks like His quiet nudge to take a step of faith when staying comfortable feels safer. And then there's this phrase, for His name's sake. That means God's leadership in our lives isn't just about our benefit. It's about His reputation, His glory. A shepherd's reputation depended on how well he cared for his flock. If his sheep were healthy and safe, people would say, "That's a good shepherd." In the same way, when God leads us in righteousness, it shows the world who He is. Our lives become a reflection of His goodness, His wisdom, and His faithfulness. Think about how this plays out in everyday life. Maybe you're facing a tough decision about your future. You want to make the right choice, but feel paralyzed by options. This verse reminds us that we don't have to stumble blindly. The shepherd knows the right path, and He promises to lead us. Our job is not to have every answer, but to trust and follow. And even when we make mistakes, His leadership brings us back to the road that honors His name. This part of Psalm 23 assures us that we are not walking through life without guidance. The shepherd's paths are not confusing mazes. They are purposeful roads, designed to draw us closer to Him, to shape our character, and to display His goodness to those around us. When we follow His lead, we not only walk in peace, but also carry His name with us wherever we go. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for You are with me. These words might be the most recognized part of Psalm 23, often spoken at funerals or during times of deep fear. But let's slow down and really think about what David is saying here. Life isn't always green pastures and still waters. There are valleys, and sometimes those valleys feel like death itself. They are dark, intimidating, and unavoidable. David doesn't say, "If I walk through the valley." He says, "Even though," which assumes it's going to happen. Trouble, loss, grief, and fear will come, but they do not have the final word. The phrase, "valley of the shadow of death," comes from a Hebrew expression that describes the darkest place imaginable. It's not only about physical death, but also about seasons of deep despair, danger, or overwhelming uncertainty. David had lived this reality. He faced enemies who wanted him dead, betrayal by those close to him, and years of running for his life. Yet even in those valleys, he could say with confidence, "I will fear no evil." How? Not because the valley wasn't real, but because the shepherd was present. This is the heart of the promise. God never promises to keep us out of valleys. What He promises is that we won't walk through them alone. Fear loses its grip when we realize the Creator of the universe is right beside us, step by step, even in the darkest places. Notice too that David says he walks through the valley, not into it to stay forever. Valleys are temporary. They may feel endless while you're in them, but the shepherd leads us through to the other side. Think about the times in your own life when you've been in a valley, maybe facing a serious diagnosis, losing someone you love, or feeling crushed under the weight of depression. Those moments feel like shadows closing in. Yet shadows, by definition, exist because there's light somewhere near. A shadow cannot exist without light. That means, even in the valley, the presence of God's light is still there, even if we can't see it clearly. David's declaration, "I will fear no evil," isn't denial. It's faith. It's choosing to trust that the shepherd is stronger than whatever lurks in the valley. And that same assurance is available to us today. No matter what shadow you're facing, you don't have to face it alone. The shepherd walks with you, and his presence is greater than your fear. You are with me. These 4 words mark a powerful shift in the psalm. Up until now, David has been talking about God. He makes me lie down. He leads me. He restores my soul. But in the valley, David changes his language. He doesn't just talk about God anymore. He talks directly to him. You are with me. It's no longer a description. It's a conversation. It's personal. That change matters. When life feels safe and easy, it's sometimes enough to talk about God in the third person. But when you're in the valley, when fear is real and shadows are close, that's when faith becomes deeply personal. You don't need distant theology. You need a present shepherd. David didn't say, "He is with me." He looked to God and said, "You are with me." That intimacy is what carries us through the darkest seasons. This moment in the psalm reveals the heart of a relationship with God. It's not just about knowing facts about Him, but about walking with Him. It's about shifting from knowing that God exists to experiencing His presence right here, right now. That's why this line carries so much comfort. It reminds us that the shepherd isn't watching from afar. He's right beside us, in the valley, in the struggle, in the fear. Think about how much that changes everything. When a child is afraid in the dark, the presence of a loving parent in the room doesn't remove the darkness, but it removes the fear. The child can rest, not because the shadows disappeared, but because someone stronger is near. That's exactly what David is describing. And here's the truth. God's presence doesn't always change the situation, but it changes us in the situation. The valley may still be dark. The danger may still be real. But fear no longer controls us when we know the shepherd is close. You are with me is the anchor that holds us steady when everything else is uncertain. It's the reminder that in every step, every breath, every moment, whether on the mountaintop or in the valley, we are never alone. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. At first glance, this might seem strange. How can tools of discipline and authority bring comfort? But for a shepherd, the rod and staff were essential instruments of care. The rod was a sturdy weapon, often a short, heavy stick used to protect the sheep from predators. The staff, with its long handle and curved hook, was used to guide, rescue, and gently correct the sheep when they wandered. Together, they symbolized protection and direction. 2 things every sheep desperately needed. David is saying that God's protection and correction are not frightening, but reassuring. Think about it. If a sheep saw its shepherd carrying a rod, it meant the shepherd was prepared to fight off anything that tried to attack. If it saw the staff, it meant the shepherd was ready to pull it back to safety if it strayed too close to danger. For the sheep, those tools weren't symbols of fear, but of security. In the same way, God's discipline and guidance in our lives may not always feel pleasant in the moment, but they are proof that He cares enough to keep us safe. A parent who loves their child sets boundaries, not out of cruelty, but out of love. God does the same with us. His correction steers us away from destructive choices, while His protection shields us from enemies we cannot see. Both work together to remind us we are not left on our own. Think of the times in your life when you wanted to go one way but felt God redirecting you, closing a door, stirring your heart with conviction, or gently pulling you back when you started to drift. At the time, it might have felt frustrating, but later you realized it was His hand keeping you from harm. That's the comfort David is pointing to. Comfort doesn't always come from having life easy. Sometimes it comes from knowing someone stronger is guarding your path, fighting off enemies you may never even notice, and refusing to let you wander too far. The rod and staff remind us that God is actively involved in our journey. He doesn't just walk beside us passively. He leads, defends, and corrects with the kind of love that brings real peace. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. This verse shifts the imagery from shepherding to hosting a feast, but the meaning is just as rich. In David's culture, preparing a table was more than setting out food. It was a statement of honor, safety, and provision. To sit at someone's table meant you were under their protection. No enemy could touch you while you were at the host's table. What's striking here is that the table is prepared not after the enemies are gone, but right in front of them. God doesn't wait for every battle to be finished before He blesses you. He provides, honors, and strengthens you even while opposition is still watching. The presence of enemies doesn't cancel the presence of God. In fact, it highlights His power, because He shows that no enemy can stop His care over you. Think about how that plays out in life. Maybe you've faced people who doubted you, criticized you, or even tried to bring you down. Yet in the middle of their opposition, you found doors opening, peace filling your heart, and blessings arriving that you couldn't explain. That's God preparing a table in the presence of your enemies. It's His way of saying, I'm in control, not them. David knew this well. He had enemies who chased him relentlessly. Saul, foreign armies, even betrayal from within his own family. But over and over, God provided for him, gave him victory, and placed honor on his life despite the opposition. That's why he could say with confidence that God prepared a table for him. This verse also points forward to a greater reality. Jesus Himself prepared a table for His followers, the Lord's Supper. He did it knowing He was surrounded by enemies who would arrest, betray, and crucify Him. Yet He still offered bread and wine as symbols of victory, grace, and a covenant that could never be broken. The message here is clear. You don't have to wait until your problems disappear to experience God's goodness. Even in the middle of conflict, God lays out a feast of His presence, His promises, and His peace. He turns the place of fear into a place of honor. He reminds you that your enemies don't get the final say. He does. And at His table, there is always more than enough. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. These words are more than a hopeful wish. They're a declaration of certainty. David doesn't say, I hope goodness and mercy will follow me. He says, surely. There's no hesitation, no doubt. He is convinced that as long as the Lord is his shepherd, goodness and mercy are not occasional visitors. They are lifelong companions. The word follow in Hebrew is even stronger than our English translation. It means to pursue, to chase after. God's goodness and mercy don't just trail behind us weakly. They actively chase us down. Imagine that. Every step you take, whether on the mountain or in the valley, you are being pursued by God's relentless kindness and love. Even when you stumble, even when you stray, His mercy is right there, refusing to let you go. This changes the way we see our lives. We often think of problems, failures, and regrets as what haunt us. But David flips the picture. He says it's not fear, shame, or guilt that chase him. It's goodness and mercy. Every day, from beginning to end, God's character surrounds him. His goodness provides blessings we don't deserve, and His mercy withholds judgment we do deserve. Together, they form a covering that keeps us secure. Think of it like this. When you look back over your life, what do you see? Sure, there are mistakes and pain. But if you really pay attention, you'll also see moments of God's goodness. Times when doors opened, when help came, when joy returned after sorrow. You'll see His mercy. Times when you failed but weren't destroyed. When you fell but were lifted back up. That's the story David is telling us. No matter what, goodness and mercy will always be part of the believer's journey. And it's not just for some of your life. David says, all the days of my life. Not just the easy days, but the hard ones too. Not just the days when you feel strong, but also the ones when you feel weak. God's goodness and mercy do not take breaks. They do not give up. They do not walk away. They pursue you until the very end. That's the promise of the shepherd. He's not only leading you into the future, He's surrounding your present with goodness and mercy, and He's covering your past with grace. When you realize that, you can walk forward with a confidence that no shadow, no enemy, and no failure can take away. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. With these words, David brings the psalm to its ultimate conclusion. Everything he's described so far, God's provision, guidance, protection, goodness, and mercy, finds its fulfillment in this final promise. The journey of the shepherd doesn't end in the valley or even at the table. It ends in God's eternal presence. For David, the house of the Lord wasn't simply a building. He spent much of his life on the run, without access to the tabernacle or temple. What he longed for wasn't a physical location, but the nearness of God Himself. Dwelling in God's house meant living under His care, enjoying His presence, and never being separated from Him. When David says, forever, he's not just talking about the days of his earthly life. He's looking beyond into eternity. This is where Psalm 23 rises above mere poetry and becomes a message of eternal hope. The green pastures, the still waters, the restored soul, the victory over enemies. All of these are glimpses of what God provides here and now. But the shepherd's ultimate goal is to bring his sheep home, where they will live with him forever. For believers today, this promise takes on even greater meaning. Jesus, the Good Shepherd, confirmed it when He said, "In my Father's house are many rooms. I go to prepare a place for you." The story doesn't end in the valley. It doesn't end with the struggles of life. It ends with dwelling in God's presence for all eternity. This perspective changes how we see everything else. If the shepherd is leading us home, then even the hardest valleys are temporary. Even the sharpest battles will fade. Every tear, every fear, every loss will give way to unending joy in His house. That's why David can end this psalm with absolute confidence. He knows the shepherd's care is not just for this life, but forever. This final line lifts our eyes from the struggles of today to the hope of eternity. It reminds us that the shepherd who walks with us now will never leave us. Not in life, not in death, not ever. And when the journey is complete, we will find ourselves safe, whole, and home in the presence of the Lord forever. Psalm 23 isn't just words on a page. It's a daily promise from the shepherd who loves you, provides for you, and never leaves your side. If this opened your eyes to the depth of what God has for you, then don't stop here. Click the next video that's on your screen right now, and let's keep diving deeper together.